Hey everybody, I'm Secular Spirit, and I'm sharing this video in the middle of a really tough time for me. For those of you who might not be aware, I'm Palestinian, the son of Palestinian refugees. Yes, I'm a Palestinian ex-Muslim and atheist. We do exist. I'm recording this video 1 month after Hamas launched an attack on Israeli soldiers and civilians on October 7, which made global headlines and drew global condemnations, as Israeli authorities reported that more than 1,400 Israelis were killed and over 200 taken as hostages. It's a brutal attack that has led to even more brutal retaliation from Israel in the subsequent weeks. As of the time I'm recording this video, Gaza's health ministry has reported more than 10,000 Palestinians have been killed in the last month. According to the United Nations, 1.5 million people, over half of Gaza's population, has been displaced due to Israel's bombing campaign. And as I record this, the end of the violence is nowhere in sight. Despite my personal connection, I haven't talked about the Israeli occupation of Palestine on this channel so far because, although religion definitely plays a very big role in the situation, it is a complex topic that I realized I'd need a lot of time and focus to express my thoughts and feelings. I've been away visiting my parents, who do not live in Palestine, for much of the past month. And by sheer coincidence, the day I arrived at their home was the day Hamas launched the attack. Since then, I've witnessed everyone from world leaders to TikTok fitness influencers sharing their opinions on the situation, usually with a dogmatic certainty on what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is evil. I've debated what to say myself and how to say it over the last few weeks, but I knew I had to say something. I felt compelled to say something about it all and about what being Palestinian means to me. Saying everything I want to say would take hours, but finally I decided to focus on 3 key issues or questions here. This is not meant as an exhaustive account, but rather some essential things that I think everyone, all of us, should consider as we watch events unfold. Is anti-Semitic Muslim extremism the reason why many Palestinians hate Israel? If you talk to Palestinians today, it's indisputable that many will talk of their hatred of Jewish people and a desire to wipe them out through war or God's judgment. Amongst Israelis, by the way, there's similar apocalyptic talk of crushing Islam and wiping out all Palestinians. It's important to note 2 things here, which seem to get lost in the emotional hyperbole I've seen revolving around this issue in the last month. Number 1, not all Palestinians hate Jewish people and desire wiping them out. There are many Palestinians, secular or religious, myself included, who do not hate Jewish people and who don't desire wiping them out. Number 2, the motivating reason for Palestinians who will openly profess their hatred of Jews isn't rooted in the single isolated fact that Israelis are Jewish. It's based on the actions of the Israeli state and its citizens who have created and are maintaining an apartheid state and occupation. A Palestinian fighting for Hamas today, who has a simmering hatred for all Jews, developed that hatred because he grew up witnessing Israeli bombing or bulldozing of Palestinian homes, Israel evicting Palestinians from their land, cutting them off from medicine and food, killing them for protesting or merely being in the wrong place, imprisoning them for decades after biased or improper trials, and taking the opportunity to abuse and dominate them whenever possible. Of course, his hatred is still awful, and it incorrectly equates Israel's occupation of Judaism, and will only worsen things in my opinion, despite me being able to understand how that hate, though awful and inaccurate in how it equates the occupation of Judaism, developed. So why am I making this clarification on the source of the hate of this hypothetical Hamas fighter? I do it because there are many supporters of Israel who will just frame this issue as Muslim fanatics who hate Jews simply for who they are, which is completely misleading. It ignores the reality of what the Israeli occupation has done to Palestinians, as I outlined earlier, And it also ignores the fact that not all Palestinians are Muslim. There are thousands of Palestinian Christians who also suffer under Israel's occupation, and there are even communities of Arab Jews and many non-Arab Jews who oppose Israel's occupation. The supporters of Israel's occupation will often label anyone who supports the Palestinian cause for freedom or who opposes Israel's violence as anti-Semitic Muslim fanatic sympathizers, thus dismissing the credibility of this cause and justifying Israel's brutality. I personally believe that it is the oppression of Israel's occupation and the ideas that justify this oppression that should be opposed, not Judaism itself. And this is the view of many who support the Palestinian cause, including atheist secularists as well as some Muslims. The Israeli supporters who use this anti-Semitism or Muslim fanatic label are attempting to distract the world from the legitimate criticisms Israel is getting for its brutality and for the apartheid state it has created. Now, some Israel supporters do this knowing very well it's a misleading distraction, but others have been indoctrinated to actually believe this distraction. We shouldn't allow this distraction to continue. We should focus the discussion on what has actually cultivated and fanned the flames of Palestinian hatred of Jewish people in Israel. The actions of Israel. Of course, the actions of Israel mean that the hatred of Jews and Judaism is very real amongst many Palestinians today. And Islam, the supposed religion of peace, is being used to make it worse, not better. Islamic language, including historical accounts of how the Prophet Muhammad brutally handled Jewish tribes' treachery, has been constantly used through propaganda and by imams during Friday prayer sermons to funnel and amplify the anger of Palestinian Muslims and turn it into hatred of anything Judaism related. If you believe your hatred of Israel is supported by God, the benevolent creator of everything, then any act of brutality you commit against Israel and Jews can theoretically be justified. And the same goes on the Israeli side too. If you believe the state of Israel is supported by God, then any act of brutality you commit for Israel against Palestinians can theoretically be justified. The other side is dehumanized, and the killings we're witnessing right now can be viewed as righteous and good before God. And inevitably, it only gets more righteous as more killing happens. And I fear this violent religious righteousness is growing before our very eyes. So to summarize this section, Palestinian opposition to Israel is rooted in Israel's oppressive occupation, not in anti-Semitic Muslim fanaticism. And while religion isn't the core cause of the hate, it is being used to amplify that hate on both sides. Why did Hamas attack Israelis on October 7? This is a question that has been frustratingly absent in much of the media coverage I've watched in the past month. But this why is the most important question that needs to be answered if we actually want to understand what's happening in Gaza right now, and if we ever want the cycle of violence and retaliation to end. So why did Hamas attack Israelis on October 7? Why has Hamas launched rockets at Israeli soldiers and civilians before the attack and since? Why does Hamas even exist in the first place? There's a simplistic answer to these questions that I've covered a bit in the first section, and it's an answer that some of you will find very familiar in the rhetoric of American politicians when they invaded Afghanistan and Iraq post 9/11. They hate us for our freedom. They hate us for who we are. They hate us for our way of life. Hamas attacked Israel because they're a Muslim extremist terrorist group that exists to hate and eradicate Jews. And that's the end of that narrative. No nuance, no further explanation. I'm going to clarify my own feelings on Hamas here before we go any further. I don't like Hamas's Islamist ideals or values that don't speak to my values as an atheist and as a humanist. I would not want to live in a country ruled by Hamas, and I oppose the killing of any civilians while Hamas is more than willing to target civilians. The media is hyper-focused on condemning Hamas, but this focus is missing the point. We need to understand why Hamas is attacking Israel, why it's killing and abducting Israeli civilians, if we're going to get to an honest discussion about what's going on here. Hamas didn't happen out of nowhere. Hamas emerged as a consequence of decades-long oppression targeting Palestinians. Why did normal Palestinians, shopkeepers, lawyers, doctors, teachers, farmers, who just want a home and the ability to keep their children safe, why did they turn to an Islamist organization that is willing to use violence to achieve its goals? Desperation. Pure and simple desperation. Israel supporters will blame Palestinians for voting for Hamas back in 2006, but people without hope, a desperate people watching their homes, their culture, their freedom rapidly being wiped out, will do desperate things. And like any desperate people of every ethnicity and background throughout human history, they will do anything to survive. Again, I don't support Hamas or its targeting of civilians. I'm merely explaining why Hamas does have the support of many Palestinians. Desperation. I've seen the Israeli government call Hamas an existential threat, but Hamas is not an existential threat to Israel. Hamas can barely impact an advanced military power like Israel. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis are not huddled in shelters amidst rubble right now, fearing for their lives without food, water, and electricity. If anything, as we've seen the extent of the damage Israel has inflicted in just a span of a few weeks in Gaza, and as there's calls for Gaza's population to flee as refugees into Egypt's neighboring Sinai Peninsula, it's actually Gaza's Palestinians who are being existentially threatened. There seems to be this Western world consensus that Hamas is a terrorist organization, but I object to that word only because it is being used to say that Hamas's violence is illegitimate while the violence of Israel is legitimate. To clarify, I oppose violence as a solution, but if we are saying that Hamas is a terrorist organization, then we have to say that Israel, with all its bombings of heavily populated civilian areas, with its use of lethal force on innocent people and fighters alike for decades, is a much worse and much more effective terrorist organization. The reality is both are indulging in terror. In the case of Hamas, they're using terror to fight for freedom out of desperation because nothing else is working. And in the case of Israel, they're using terror to suppress all Palestinian attempts to fight for their freedom and to change the status quo of Israel's occupation. The eradication of Hamas might be Israel's stated goal, but the powers that be in the Israeli government are not fools. They know that once they get rid of Hamas, something else will emerge to replace it, because Hamas is not the enemy. The continued existence of Palestinians in the land the Israeli state wants is the enemy. The refusal of Palestinians to submit or leave, their desire to fight for their freedom, is the enemy. Israel wants to crush Palestinian spirits. That's what they're doing right now, to ensure no future Hamas emerges for a long time. But another Hamas will emerge until Israel's systemic oppression dissolves. Those who believe that violence against Palestinians will end the violence against Israelis should look to the past few decades to see just how misguided their beliefs are. To conclude this section, Hamas is a symptom of Israel's systemic oppression, and I believe it's only by getting rid of the systemic oppression that Hamas will no longer be seen as necessary by the Palestinian people. What will lead to peace? I saved the most difficult question for last because I have no answer for this question. Although I've never lived in Palestine, the Israeli occupation is something that has defined my entire life. My parents, although both Palestinian, met as exiles in another country. In a very literal way, I wouldn't be alive today if the Israeli occupation didn't happen. It's a weird feeling having something define your life and yet be very much an outsider to it at the same time. I've lived my whole life outside of Palestine because my parents wanted me to have a better life than the one most Palestinians in my country are currently experiencing. For as long as I can remember, I've been told stories about my grandfather, about my father. I've watched the news stories on TV, read history books, but I never lived it myself. Being Palestinian is difficult for me too, because since I'm no longer a Muslim, I have separated from the core beliefs and culture of the majority of Palestinians, some of whom have grown in their faith and become more dogmatic and extreme as Israel's occupation endured. Expanding on my point in the previous section, when people are hopeless, when people are desperate, that's when they're likely to turn to religion's promises to make things right, to punish their enemies, and they will justify anything through their religion. Israel's occupation is a test or punishment from God, or both, depending on which Muslim you speak to, and our reward will be waiting for us in paradise. I don't share in those beliefs. As far as I can tell, this world is the only one we have, and no God appears to be there to justify all our suffering in this world, which makes me an outsider once again. And yet, despite being an outsider in all these ways, the Palestinian suffering, and the suffering of Israelis too, is a daily sadness I carry with me. A daily cynicism as I see things worsen, as I see people on both sides killed year after year, as I see the hate increase. It's a daily helplessness because I am powerless to find a solution. It's beyond any one individual to find a solution. It feels like this big ship we're all on, and even though we're all propelling this big ship forward, none of us can steer it away from the destructive path that it's on. It's just too big, too complex, with every world power involved in some way or another. I don't have a solution, but I do know some things. I know that the violent and oppressive approach that Israel is following won't lead to peace, and the violent approach of Hamas is the desperate action of hopeless people that also won't lead to peace. I think in a very real way, Palestinians are lashing out for Hamas because they don't know what else they can do. Here's me being a realist, steering clear from any kind of idealism. The world runs on power, political and military, and Israel is in control on both fronts. I'll leave it to politicians and political scientists who are experts in this stuff to blame this side or that side for failures in finding a one-state solution or a two-state solution. But for me, we have global bodies like the United Nations that we supposedly believe in, international laws the countries are supposedly meant to follow. And what I'm interested in is an end to Israel's illegal occupation that disregards United Nations resolutions, and an end to its injustices that violate international laws. Only then can we start moving towards an actual solution. But the Israeli state has demonstrated time and time and time again that it's not interested in following those resolutions or stopping its injustices. And I suspect that's because they don't want to show any weakness. They don't want to budge a single inch, partially because of the history of the Jewish people, going all the way back to ancient exiles to more recent exiles, all the way up to the Holocaust. The Jewish people have been historically oppressed. And what a sad, really sad state of affairs it is that Israel, a country built by Jewish people, including Holocaust survivors, has now taken on the role of the oppressor. Here's another thing I suspect. Things won't change for the better until the power dynamic that Israel enjoys shifts. Until countries like the US and Canada, the country where I live, and many more countries, stop blindly supporting Israel's apartheid state and rampant violence. I saw this British call-in show recently, I can't remember its name right now, where a caller was defending the collateral damage, i.e. civilian deaths, inflicted by Israel in its bombing of Gaza. The caller justified it as the only way to eradicate Hamas, but the host asked a key question. Would Israel deploy the same strategy if Hamas was based in Israeli towns amongst Israeli civilians? The caller couldn't give a straight answer because the answer is obviously no. That double standard is part of the power imbalance today. Palestinian lives don't matter as much as Israeli lives, according to world leaders and the media. Look at this chart that shows the estimated deaths of Palestinians and Israelis over the last 15 years. As you can see, there have been far more Palestinian deaths than Israeli ones. But you know why the October 7 attack got much more media attention than the constant, disproportionately high deaths of Palestinians in prior years? It's because the Israelis suffered huge losses for the first time in a long time, and Israel made sure to maintain the disproportionate death ratio in subsequent weeks. Is this Hamas's fault? This question is missing the point. Again, Hamas is a symptom, a reaction. It's the oppressive occupation that's at fault. So to sum up this final part, until the world community stops blindly supporting Israel and propagating a double standard that values Israeli lives and dehumanizes Palestinians, things won't change. They'll only get worse. I'll finish off this video by saying that I've been encouraged by seeing how so many people on social media, as well as on mainstream media, are fighting the typical Israel-supporting narratives that I've also attempted to challenge here in this video. And a shout out to the interviews that Egyptian comedian Bassem Youssef has done in the past month with Piers Morgan. I highly recommend that you watch them if you haven't already. More so than ever before, what we think and express and the stance we take can be noticed and shared extensively on social media. And the more of us speak out against the injustices of Israel and against violence from both sides that target civilians, the more influence we can have on the governments that hold power in the situation. And that can actually impact events and make change happen, hopefully for the better. I'm Secular Spirit, and thank you for watching this video with me. I'll be back with another video soon.